Hey everybody, I just wanted to do this video to share my thoughts on the recent sports gambling scandal that erupted when it was alleged that NBA players, and I believe it was a coach, were allegedly throwing games and possibly leaking insider information. And on top of that, allegedly luring gamblers to play fixed poker games and using the opportunity to play with like professional athletes, celebrity type players as the bait to get these suckers to allegedly play in rigged poker games. And I just wanted to share my thoughts mainly on the poker aspect of that. The sports betting angle has been covered in recent days by a lot of different channels, and things like point shaving, crooked referees, players being bought off or being potentially allegedly blackmailed or extorted into throwing games. That's something that's existed for a while. You could go as far back as when the Chicago the Black Sox scandal, where the rigging of the World Series took place. Speaking of which, the World Series is happening right now. But yeah, that was like the first, I think, major scandal. So that kind of this NBA scandal reminds me of that story to some extent. I actually find the alleged rigged poker game to be of more interest, just because I have a lot of experience as both a poker player, and of course this channel focuses mainly on table games, on playing table games. And I've been asked a lot of I've been asked many times, almost on a regular basis, like questions like whether the shufflers could be rigged, whether they are rigged, whether you could really trust casinos not to cheat you and things like that. The answer to those questions is that there's always the potential for games to be rigged. What it really comes down to is the incentive. For the longest time, fixed card games have existed. There's always been different tricks that scammers could use to rig poker games, even before the advent of modern technology of nano cameras, micro cameras, X-ray tables, things like that. Things like invisible ink, marking cards with invisible ink, and then having special glasses or even contact lenses to read the invisible ink on the marked cards. So that way, you could mark certain cards so you know exactly what your opponent has. And the most commonly used tactics back in the day would be that you'd have multiple insiders that would be colluding, and one or more fish at the table who were the table suckers who weren't in on the scam. And these colluding players would signal each other based on the card marking, so they know exactly what cards the sucker has, what cards each of them have, so they would play differently against each other. Now with modern technology, you don't need to use invisible ink. You could have nano cameras. You could have cameras that are so small that you really can't detect them. X-ray tables. Apparently, it was alleged that X-ray tables were used in this scam. So what I would say is this. Personally, I would never trust a poker game for any substantial amount of money that's outside of a licensed establishment, because there's just so much potential for private games, for private illegal games to be rigged, especially if you don't know who you're playing with. If you find that you're invited to a private game, you have no idea whether or not everyone else at the table knows each other, whether you're the table sucker. There's been a lot of stories, a lot of sensational stories about games in big name hotels featuring celebrities, Hollywood celebrities playing poker for high stakes. And you really don't know if those games were all, not legit games. Like if these celebrities were potentially used as bait, the same way that these NBA players were alleged to have been used. There's just so many ways to do it. Now, I guess that also begs the question: if those games are rigged, then couldn't games at strip casinos, couldn't games at licensed casino establishments also be rigged? And I'm referring just to poker against other players. And the answer is technically they can, but I highly doubt. I'm almost certain that they're not. And I would trust playing poker at a legit casino with my money just because there's really no incentive. But that's what it really comes down to. It comes down to incentive. Is there an incentive for the casino to rig their poker games when they know they're making so much money long term off of the continuous flow of money off of the rake? And not only that, they're also, in many cases, casinos use poker not quite as a loss leader because they make money, but they use it as a way of funneling in players to play slots and table games. Once they're already in the casino, as far as they're concerned, there's a better chance that they'll play the house games and spend even more money. Their business is a long-term business. Now, that is absolutely not the case for private games. A lot of these private games, a lot of the people running these private games don't have a long-term vision of running these games for years, decades, or whatever. A lot of them are actually set up to be a short-term heist. So to them, in their situation, they have the incentive as well as the capability of setting up those games. So I've had experience in the past playing at private games. Here in Toronto, the poker scene back in the day was massive before it became widely legalized online, and before there was casinos almost everywhere. Ontario is almost like a mini Vegas. There's so many casinos here. A lot of people don't know that. But back in the day where there was fewer casinos, there was a big underground poker scene in Toronto. So I played in a few private games in my day, but at the end of the day, I was never really big into it because I just didn't trust it. There were just too many possibilities, too many openings for cheating to take place in these illegal games. Now, another big question that I get asked, because I film a lot of table games, a lot of carnival games, which are like poker variants, but house edge games, whether or not shuffle machines could be rigged. And I'm pretty sure they can be, but again, why would a casino risk their gaming license, which is literally a license to print money? There's no reason why they would risk their gaming license to rig a shuffler. So I am pretty much absolutely certain that any of the casinos that I've played at did not have rigged shufflers, that the shufflers are completely legitimate. And a lot of people, I think they have unfounded suspicion about these continuous shufflers or auto shuffler machines because they just feel that technically it is possible with things like AI, card recognition, things like that it could be done. But you got to look at the fact that even before auto shufflers existed, there were dealers known as mechanics who were literally like magicians. They still exist today. There are some dealers who are that skilled that they could literally, through sleight of hand, set up the deck as well. Like they could pull one over on you without you knowing in I would say 99.9% of cases. So if anything, casinos, one of the reasons why they brought auto shufflers in is because they wanted to protect themselves against potential dealers potentially colluding with players to hit some big hands. I mean, at a lot of these casinos, you have on games like Ultimate Texas Hold'em, for example, you have progressive jackpots that are in the millions. So the biggest risk of cheating actually would go against the casino, where you could have a dealer that's a mechanic who could potentially deal their friend a flop royal flush for a 7-figure amount. So that's the big concern that casinos have. And I think that's besides the fact that you're able to deal a lot more hands per hour, but another benefit of having continuous shuffler machines or auto shuffle machines in the case of the poker variant games is to protect against that. Additionally, those machines are audited by, I'm sure they're audited by gaming commission employees. because of the fact that a licensed casino, in most cases, they're owned by big corporations. Their business model is long term, and not only are they making a theoretical percentage on every single hand, every single slot spin, there's all in most of those in my experience, in most of those auto shuffler dealt games, most of the players don't play optimally, especially in Ultimate Texas Hold'em. Every table that I'm at, I have rarely seen a player play optimal strategy. Most people don't raise on their ace, their mid aces. They won't raise with like hands like King 10. So the theoretical percentage, in my opinion, is much lower than the actual amount of money that they're making running a straight game. So, long story short, does the technology exist to make it technically possible for cheating to take place, for games to be rigged across the board? Absolutely. In my opinion, absolutely. But do I think that casinos rig their games? Absolutely not. It just wouldn't make any sense for them to do it. The advantage of a short-term heist versus risking a casino license, which again is like a license to print money, it just doesn't make any sense for them to rig it. And in my personal experience, I've played auto shuffler games. I played hand shuffled games as well in different casinos. I played in some smaller casinos where they still actually hand shuffle all of the carnival games, and I've noticed that my results have been almost identical. Can you trust gambling in a casino that's fully licensed? Most likely, yes. In private games, I would say absolutely not. I would say, you're really you're really putting yourself at risk of being conned in a lot of these private poker games. So in conclusion, I would say, yeah, like, can games technically be rigged? I think any game could be rigged with the technology that exists today, but I would personally trust risking my money at licensed casinos because the incentive doesn't exist for them to cheat. They have a great business anyway, a license to print money. While it's possible, it's almost certainly not the case. When it comes to private games, I would say that, in my personal opinion, private games that are unlicensed, you are more likely to be cheated than not, in my opinion, and you're definitely at risk of being the table sucker. Technically, any game that you're playing one side could be rigged. I mean, I guess theoretically, even a game like craps or a game like baccarat, you could choose either side, right? So let's just say, like in craps, like back in the day, they would load dice, like loaded dice were a thing. But again, if you see that the dice are loaded towards like 2s, 3s, and 12s, then you could just take the don't pass all day, right? So you could take the other side. And same with baccarat, you could set up the deck to favor one side, but you could switch between player and banker. So, theoretically, there's a 0%, as long as you could freely bet each side, there's really, like a 0% chance of being cheated, even if it is set up. Yeah, those are my thoughts on that. Can you trust gambling? Yes and no. But my advice to you guys, stay in the casinos. I would say you have nothing to worry about. So I hope you enjoyed this little chat. And if you like this kind of content, let me know in the comments, and stay tuned for some great gambling content, table game content coming your way in the next few days.